She wore a badge, a symbol of honor, justice, and duty. For over a decade, Officer Valerie Cincinnati patrolled the streets of New York City, a sworn protector of the people. She was supposed to uphold the law, but behind closed doors she was plotting to break it in the most sinister way imaginable. What happens when the very people we trust to serve and protect turn into the monsters they were sworn to fight? What happens when an NYPD officer, someone trained in crime and deception, decides to orchestrate her own deadly scheme? A murder-for-hire plot so twisted, it shocked even the most seasoned investigators. Valerie wasn't just looking for revenge. She wasn't just looking for freedom. She wanted blood. Her target? Her estranged husband Isaiah Carvalho Jr., a man she had once promised to love and cherish. But a bitter divorce wasn't enough for Valerie. She didn't want a legal battle. She didn't want custody negotiations. She wanted a permanent solution. So she reached into the shadows, deep into the criminal underworld, willing to pay thousands of dollars to make him disappear. $7,000 in cold, hard cash, paid in a way she believed would leave no trace. But what Valerie didn't know was that she wasn't the one pulling the strings. Because someone was watching her. Someone who knew every step she was taking. And before she could see it coming, the FBI had turned her own game against her. But here's where it gets even darker. Her husband wasn't the only target. Valerie had one more deadly request, something even more disturbing than the first. A request so shocking, it would leave investigators questioning if they had uncovered a murderer in uniform, or something far worse. This is the chilling true story of how an NYPD cop plotted a brutal murder, only to be taken down by the very system she once served. How did Valerie, a trusted officer, become a cold-blooded conspirator? What drove her to cross the line? And most importantly, how did she get caught? Stay with me because this story is about to take a dark and twisted turn. To understand how an NYPD officer found herself at the center of a chilling murder-for-hire plot, we need to go back to where it all began. Valerie Cincinnati was born and raised in Long Island, New York, a place known for its quiet suburban neighborhoods and working-class communities. On the surface, her life seemed ordinary. She wasn't from a broken home. She didn't grow up in poverty. She wasn't surrounded by crime. By all accounts, she had a normal childhood. A bright student, social and determined, Valerie had dreams of making something of herself. But somewhere along the way, something inside her changed. At 20 years old, she pursued a career in law enforcement. In 2007, she joined the New York City Police Department, a prestigious and respected position. She wasn't just another officer in the background, she had a strong presence. She worked for 12 years, patrolling the streets, handling cases, making arrests. To the outside world, she was a dedicated public servant, someone who had sworn to protect and serve. But behind the badge, behind the uniform, was a woman with secrets. Despite her authoritative presence at work, Valerie's personal life was spiraling out of control. She was married to Isaiah Carvalho Jr., a man she once loved, but that love had turned into something bitter, toxic, resentful. Their relationship was riddled with jealousy, heated arguments, and power struggles. Valerie wasn't just a strong-willed woman, she was controlling, possessive, and obsessive. Over time, the tension between them grew unbearable. Accusations flew back and forth, arguments became routine, and their marriage crumbled beyond repair. By 2019, the two had reached a breaking point. Isaiah filed for divorce, initiating a legal battle that only made things worse. The custody of their child became the center of the war. Valerie wasn't just fighting for her freedom, she was fighting to keep control, to make sure Isaiah had no say in her life anymore. And that's where the obsession began. She didn't just want to move on. She wanted him erased. While her marriage was disintegrating, Valerie had already found someone new, John DeRubba. John was not the perfect partner, he had his own baggage. He wasn't wealthy. He wasn't powerful. But for Valerie he was an escape. Someone who listened to her complaints, fed into her frustrations, and gave her the attention she craved. But John wasn't just a new boyfriend. He was about to become the key to her downfall. At first, their relationship seemed like a fresh start, a new beginning after years of turmoil. But for Valerie, it wasn't enough to simply be with someone new. Because Isaiah was still out there. And to Valerie, as long as he was breathing, he was a problem. And problems, in her mind, had only one solution. She started talking, plotting, fantasizing about what life would be like without Isaiah in the picture. What started as bitter complaints soon turned into deadly whispers. And soon, those whispers would become an offer. A deal. A plan. A plan that would set everything in motion. A plan that, if executed, would change everything. But what Valerie didn't know, what she never could have imagined, was that the moment she spoke her darkest thoughts out loud, was the moment she sealed her own fate. Because someone was listening. It started as a whisper. A passing remark. A joke. At least that's what John DeRubba thought at first. Valerie had always been vocal about her hatred for her estranged husband, Isaiah Carvalho Jr. She ranted about him constantly, how much she despised him, how she wished he would just disappear. To John it seemed like nothing more than angry talk, the kind of bitterness that came with a messy divorce. But over time something shifted. The jokes became ideas. The ideas became suggestions. And then came the plan. One day Valerie looked at John and said, "I need him gone." John brushed it off. Thought she was just venting. But Valerie wasn't venting, she was serious. "I need him out of the picture. For good." At first she toyed with ideas. What if he had an accident? Maybe a car crash, something quick, something that looked natural. Or maybe a robbery gone wrong. A random act of violence, just another statistic in the city's crime reports. John laughed it off. But Valerie's face remained cold. She wasn't joking. She wanted a clean hit. No loose ends. No mistakes. And then she did something that made it very, very real. She went to the bank. She withdrew $7,000 in cash. She placed it into John's hands. Make it happen. At that moment, John realized this wasn't just anger. It wasn't just talk. This was murder. And then, just when he thought he'd heard it all, Valerie took things one step further. Isaiah wasn't her only target. She had someone else in mind. Someone young. Someone innocent. John's own teenage daughter. To Valerie the girl was in the way. A distraction. An obstacle. "Get rid of her too," she said. She said it without hesitation. Without remorse. For John that was the moment he knew he was in too deep. And if he didn't do something fast, someone was going to die. Because Valerie wasn't just talking anymore. She had the money, she had the motive, and now, she was waiting for the execution. But what she didn't know was that her own execution was about to begin. Valerie thought she was in control. She thought she had planned everything down to the last detail. She had picked her targets. She had chosen how they would die. She had paid the money. Now all she had to do was wait. But what she didn't know, what she never could have known, was that from the moment she handed over that $7,000 she had already lost. Because John DeRubba never intended to go through with it. The second Valerie gave him the cash he felt sick. This wasn't just a bad relationship anymore. This wasn't just a toxic breakup. This was murder. And he wasn't about to let it happen. DeRubba made a decision that would change everything. He picked up his phone, dialed a number, and called the FBI. Federal agents wasted no time. Within hours they had a full-scale sting operation in motion. Their target? A New York City police officer, one of their own. If they were going to take Valerie down they needed proof. Hard evidence. They couldn't just rely on John's word. They needed Valerie to confirm in her own voice that she wanted Isaiah dead. And so they set the trap. John played along, pretending to be the middleman in the hit-for-hire plot. He cooperated fully, wearing a hidden recording device whenever he was with Valerie. Every conversation, every chilling detail was caught on tape. The FBI knew she was serious. But that wasn't enough. They needed to push it one step further. So they did something bold. Something Valerie would never see coming. They faked Isaiah's murder. The setup was meticulous. Agents staged the crime scene. A lifeless body slumped in a car, a pool of blood trickling onto the seat. Isaiah, very much alive, was instructed to play along. They took photos, positioning him just right, making the scene look hauntingly real. Then came the final step. An undercover FBI agent, posing as a hitman, took the staged photos and sent them to John DeRubba. "It's done." John, following the script laid out by federal agents, showed the message to Valerie. This was the moment. The moment of truth. If there was ever a second where Valerie could have shown regret, could have hesitated, could have realized what she had done, this was it. But there was no shock. No horror. No second thoughts. She stared at the image, processed it, and instead of reacting with fear or guilt, she simply said, "Delete the messages." Cold. Calculated. Remorseless. She had just seen what she believed was evidence of her husband's murder, and her only concern was making sure the evidence disappeared. But what she didn't know was that every word, every breath, every reaction was being recorded. And the moment she uttered those words, "Delete the messages," she sealed her fate. Because now the FBI had everything they needed. The trap had been set. And now, it was time to spring it. The plan was perfect. At least that's what Valerie Cincinnati thought. The money had been paid. The proof of death had been set. As far as she was concerned, Isaiah Carvalho Jr. was no longer a problem. But she had no idea that just hours after she had calmly ordered John DeRubba to delete the messages, a team of federal agents was already closing in on her. They weren't going to wait. They didn't need to. The FBI had everything they needed: recordings, text messages, financial transactions, and most damning of all, her own words, spoken without hesitation, caught on tape. And so, on May 17, 2019, federal agents moved in. They arrived at her Long Island home in force, sirens off, tactical gear on, weapons drawn. She had no idea they were coming. And then, a knock at the door. For a brief moment, Valerie probably still thought she was untouchable. She was an NYPD officer, a veteran of the force. She knew the system. She knew the law. But what she didn't know, what she hadn't even considered, was that this time the system wasn't working for her. It was working against her. When she opened that door, she wasn't in control anymore. In an instant, Valerie was surrounded. There was no time to react. No time to think. Valerie Cincinnati, you are under arrest. The badge that once protected her? Useless. The uniform she once wore with pride? Now just a memory. She was in handcuffs before she could even protest. As agents swept through her home, they began uncovering the final pieces of evidence, the last details that would seal her fate in court. Her phone. It was filled with messages discussing the hit, carefully worded but unmistakable in their intent. Her search history. How to hire a hitman. How much does a contract killing cost? How to stage a car accident. How long does it take for someone to bleed out? And perhaps most damning of all, the conversations with John DeRubba, captured on FBI recordings. This wasn't a setup. This wasn't misunderstood frustration. This was premeditated murder. Valerie Cincinnati wasn't just in trouble, she was finished. The trial begins. As the case made its way to court, Valerie did exactly what most criminals do when backed into a corner. She denied everything. At first, she insisted she was innocent, that she had never seriously wanted her husband dead, that her words were taken out of context, that this was all some huge misunderstanding. When that didn't work, she did what desperate people do. She turned on the only person who could have saved her. John DeRubba. She claimed he set her up. That he was lying. That this was all some twisted revenge scheme. She painted herself as the victim, a woman trapped in a bad relationship, manipulated by a man who wanted to destroy her. But the evidence said otherwise. The recordings. The messages. The bank withdrawal. The cold, emotionless way she had responded to her husband's death. It all pointed to one truth. Valerie wasn't framed. She was guilty. And the court saw right through her lies. The charges against her were devastating. Murder for hire conspiracy. Obstruction of justice. The same justice she had once sworn to uphold. And now, the same system she had spent her life working for was about to determine her fate. But even with the overwhelming evidence against her, the biggest twist in Valerie's story was yet to come. Because she was about to take one last gamble, one final desperate attempt to avoid the fate she knew she deserved. But would it work? Or was she already too far gone? The verdict was coming. And there was no escaping it now. The courtroom was silent. All eyes were on Valerie Cincinnati, the disgraced NYPD officer who had once patrolled the streets of New York, wearing a badge that symbolized law and order. But now she stood before the very system she had betrayed, awaiting her fate. The evidence against her was undeniable. The recordings, the staged murder photos, the bank withdrawal, the text messages, it all painted the picture of a woman who had meticulously planned a murder-for-hire plot. She had tried everything to escape responsibility, denial, blame, manipulation, but nothing worked. The weight of the case against her was simply too heavy. And then, faced with the reality that a jury would almost certainly convict her of the more serious charges, Valerie made her final move. She struck a deal. Instead of fighting the charges head-on, she pleaded guilty, not to murder for hire, but to a lesser charge, obstruction of justice. It was a calculated decision. If she went to trial and lost, she could be facing decades behind bars. But by taking a plea deal, she would get a significantly reduced sentence. For the prosecution, it was a pragmatic choice. The recordings proved that Valerie wanted her husband dead, but since the murder never actually happened, a jury trial could have left room for doubt. This way they ensured that she wouldn't walk free, she would still pay the price for her actions. And so, when the judge delivered the final sentence, the reality of what she had done finally hit her. 4 years in federal prison. A former police officer, a woman who once carried a gun and a badge, A woman who had sworn to serve and protect, now stripped of everything. No uniform. No authority. Just another inmate in an orange jumpsuit. Her freedom was gone. Her career was over. Her reputation was destroyed. The very system she had used for power had now turned her into a prisoner. As she was led away in handcuffs, there was no sympathy in the courtroom. No tears were shed for her. Because Valerie Cincinnelli hadn't just tried to kill her husband, she had been willing to murder a teenage girl just to get what she wanted. And for that, no one was sorry to see her go. 4 years in prison would never be enough for what she had done, but it was enough to ensure she would never wear a badge again. An NYPD officer, a sworn protector, now reduced to an inmate behind bars. But the real question remains, was 4 years truly justice? Or did she get away with murder that never happened?